Welcome to our third lecture in the series of Philosophy of Science. If you recall, we have had a series of face-to-face interactions, and we shall also be having other meetings, probably through Google Class and Zoom. And this is the third lecture. We've just had about two of them in the philosophy of science, but more specifically relating it to economics. We haven't started with the application yet because we are discussing the general concepts and ideas from the philosophy of science. If you recall, in the previous two lectures, I did go through knowledge and the nature of understanding. And more specifically, we looked at knowledge. After that, we looked at nature of reality. Then we did discuss concepts, the building blocks of understanding. And in that area, we were able to describe what concepts are, the nature of concepts. We also examined concepts, constructs, and variables. I'm sure we now know the difference between those three words and how they're related to one another. And then we ended up with the conceptual systems, which is the basis for deeper understanding. Ladies and gentlemen, as I promised you in the previous lecture, I did say that after covering the nature of understanding, which is actually knowledge, we shall go to our next topic of constructing the world. And since in our discussions on the philosophy of science, but more specifically the reality, the nature of reality, and that's really the ontological perspective, I promised that I'll be taking you to how individuals construct the world. Now, before I go into the details of what is involved in constructing the world, ladies and gentlemen, I want to give you three basic textbooks that we are using to understand these concepts very well. The first one is the title is Carnap's Construction of the World, and it is the off-ball and the emergence of logical empiricism. And please find time to read that book. It's a little bit old, published in 1997, but of course by Alan W. Richardson. The second book that I want you to look for and read, it is the Cambridge, a companion to logical empiricism. And that one is published by the Cambridge University Press, Alan Richardson and Thomas Wubel. The third book that I want you to read is The Logical Structure of the World and Pseudo-Problems in Philosophy. And of course, you will find that book also very enriching and quite important. Now, having gone through construction or understanding of reality, we now move to the construction of the world, constructing the world. How do we construct the world? So in this lecture, these are the issues that we are going to discuss. One, I will introduce you to the philosophical essay on probability by Pierre-Simon Laplace. I'm sure you are very familiar with Laplace's work. Two, I will introduce the Laplacian demon. Three, I will take you to Laplace's suitability thesis. And time allowing, we shall go through the inferential suitability, conditional suitability, a priori scrutability. So these are Laplace's scrutability thesis, and they do help us in understanding how we construct the world. And I'll try to link that to the ideas we have just covered in what we call concepts, constructs, and what we call the variables. Then we shall end this lecture with the application of Laplacian demon to epistemology, philosophy of science, and metaphysics. So ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this lecture, and I hope you will enjoy this lecture. And I want you to be as relaxed as you can be. I do not want you to start stressing yourself, because learning is not supposed to be stressful, ladies and gentlemen. Now, since we are dealing with the concept of constructing the world, I want to give you ideas from the works of Laplace. Now, in 1814, Laplace came up with a writing, and this was on the what we call the philosophical essay on probability. You know, Laplace is known for a great job in the area of inferential statistics is concerned, but more specifically in the area of probability. Laplace is a scholar who did a lot, and he drew our understanding and, of course, our attention to probability. And as you'll be seeing, the concept of logic will be certainly coming up from time to time as we consider the aspects of philosophy of science. So in 1814, the philosophical essay on probability, Pierre Simon Laplace wrote, and he said, an intellect which at a certain moment would know all forces that set nature in motion, and all positions of all items of which nature is composed, if this intellect were also vast enough to submit these data to analysis, it would embrace in a single formula the movements of the greatest bodies of the universe and those of the tiniest atom. For such an intellect, nothing would be uncertain, and the future, just like the past, will be present before its eyes. So that is a quote that is taken from Pierre Simon Laplace in 1814 in his writings on philosophical essay on probability. So I want to invite you to pick that book and read, because it does exist out there. Now, Laplace suggests that, especially from what I've just given you, Laplace suggests that given the right basic information and given sufficient powerful reasoning, all truth about the universe can be determined. Remember, in the previous lecture, we did talk about the issue of knowledge. And we did define knowledge as justified true beliefs. I did tell you what justification involves, what truth involves, and what beliefs involves. And we did also bring in the concept of propositions. So Laplace here is simply telling us that if you are given the right basic information, and mark the word right, basic information, and of course, if you have sufficiently powerful reasoning, all truth, not part of the truth, but all the truth about the universe can be determined. And one I also told you, Socrates said, that Aristotle, the unexamined life is not worth living. So therefore we need to understand the universe where we are. We need to understand ourselves. We need to understand the universe and the relationship between us and the universe and the other bodies that constitute the universe. Now, for Laplace, Pierre, this basic information included truth about the fundamental laws of physics. Please mark that. Truth about the fundamental laws of physics. And truth about the location of all fundamental entities at a time. So therefore you need information, right? And information that includes the truth about the fundamental laws of physics, and information that maintains the truth or has the truth about the location of all fundamental entities at a time. Now, of course, from the literature that is available, we can call this the Laplacian truth. This is Laplace, but we can call it the Laplacian truth. So truth to him is truth about the fundamental laws of physics and truth about the fundamental locations and location of all the fundamental items or entities at a time in the universe. And that is the Laplacian truth. Now, ladies and gentlemen, the reasoning behind the Laplacian thinking is that it requires, the reasoning he's talking about here, that reasoning requires an idealized, vast enough intellect. In other words, you need to have vast enough intellect, which we might call the Laplacian intellect. So the intellect is very important because you will not be able to understand the truth, you will not be able to understand reality, and construct reality of the universe without certainly vast enough intellect to maintain and process that information. Now, ladies and gentlemen, the Laplacian intellect refers to an intellect who knows all the Laplacian truth, right? And that intellect that knows all the Laplacian truth is what is referred to as a Laplacian demon, right? So Laplacian demon is a Laplacian intellect that knows all the Laplacian truth. Right, the key claim, ladies and gentlemen, in Laplacian's text is that a Laplacian demon would be uncertain of nothing. Right, you need to mark that. That Laplacian demon will know everything. In other words, Laplacian demon would be uncertain of nothing. In effect, Laplace is saying that for any proposition that the demon can entertain, for any proposition that the demon will not be uncertain about the proposition. So in other words, you must have that truth, right? You must have that intellect that is vast enough, and for any proposition that the demon can entertain, the demon will not be uncertain about that proposition. So if we can develop that intellect, right, and you can be able to get all that information, right, for any proposition that that demon can entertain, the demon will not be uncertain about that proposition too. So in other words, if we bring in a small variation, ladies and gentlemen, for any proposition the demon can entertain, the demon will be in a position to know whether it is true. Right, so that's what it is. Let's just use an example for us to bring this point home, because it may look and seem abstract. Let us suppose and let us imagine ladies and gentlemen, that there will be an election tomorrow in Uganda. So tomorrow we expect an election, and of course we expect an election in 2021. I'm sure you are very sure of that. So if we assume, right, and we suppose that there will be an election tomorrow, I can entertain a proposition that the NRM candidate will win. I can also entertain a proposition that the people power candidate will win. And I can also entertain a proposition that the FDC candidate will win. Now, what I've just given you is a proposition, right? A proposition that an NRM candidate will win, a proposition that people power candidate will win, and a proposition that an FDC member will win. Now, if Laplace's thesis is right, ladies and gentlemen, a Laplacian demon in my shoes will be able to know which, if any of these propositions is true. Because it has a vast intellect, right? And it has received that information and the truth about all elements in the universe, and therefore it can actually tell us which proposition will be correct. Is it the NRM candidate winning, or the people power winning, or the FDC candidate winning? So that is the Laplacian demon being in position to know which of those propositions is correct. Now, let's also take another step and imagine that if the NRM candidate will win, the demon will be in a position to know it, that NRM candidate will win. If the people power candidate will win, then the demon has that ability to tell us that it will win. Remember, Laplace was concerned with the probability, right? And that means you have information, and that information will represent the truth about what is happening, and you have an intellect that is vast enough to process that information and take a decision. So the demon will be in a position to know it. Now, if the FDC candidate will win, the demon will be in a position to know it. So Laplace's thesis, ladies and gentlemen, is an instance of what we call a suitability thesis. So what I've just presented to you is a suitability thesis. Now, the suitability thesis, ladies and gentlemen, says that the world is, in a certain sense, comprehensible, at least given a certain class of basic truth about the world. If we have a certain class of truth about the world, then we are in position to comprehend the world and construct that world. That is what Laplace's theory is talking about. So in particular, it says that all truth about the world are scrutable from some basic truth. So all truth about the world are scrutable from some basic truth. Now, this means roughly that there is a connection in the realm of knowledge between the basic truth and all the rest. So you need to have that basic truth that you must relate to the rest of the truth, and for us to be able to construct the world. And the rest of the truth can be determined as long as you have some basic truth. So you're starting from somewhere. So we might then put a version of Laplace's thesis as following, and that's the Laplacian scrutability. So let's put it this way, that for all true propositions P, right, we are talking about a proposition being now verified, because Laplace says if you have some basic truth about the universe, basic truth about this and this and the other, then at the end of the day, you'll be able to know what will happen. Take that very example of the elections that I talked about. The Laplace's demon will tell you that an NRM candidate will win because you've got some basic information that you can base on now to make a decision, but after going through that vast intellect, which you call the Laplacian intellect. Right, so we can then have the Laplacian thesis put this way, and this is the Laplacian suitability. For all true propositions, P, we are talking about proposition P that is true, a Laplacian intellect who knew all the Laplacian truth would be in a position to know that proposition P. Right, if you knew the truth, you'll be able to, and in position to know that P. And that's the suitability thesis. It's a suitability proposition, ladies and gentlemen. Laplace's thesis, that's the one that we've put that way, right? Now, in the years since Laplace wrote, Laplace's demon has come in for some kind of battling. In other words, there's been battering from various scholars. Of course, it had these things have been critiqued over time. Not everybody will agree with what Laplace said. But whether you've got a debate out there, people are disputing and they are accepting, I want to think that there remains much value in Laplace's pregnant idea. So one can extract some of the value by examining the problems that arise for Laplace's thesis and by reformulating the suitability thesis in a way that avoids them. And one sort of problems arises from the information that Laplace allows in the base. And in this case, most famously, the apparent failure of determinism in quantum mechanics suggests that the demon could not predict the future just from facts about physical laws and about the present. Now, if we go back to our example of elections, it may be, for example, that futures in which the NRM candidate, the people power candidate, and the FDC candidate win are all left open by these facts. All three features could evolve from the present state of the world given the right sort of quantum mechanics or quantum mechanical evolution, ladies and gentlemen. And of course, those are some of the limitations of the Laplace's thesis. Now, I know there are also other limitations and, about the thesis, and some people have argued over time, and they continue to argue that complete physical information is not enough to know all truth about the mind. You know, our minds do think in various ways, and they process information in various ways. Therefore, if Laplace's demon has never experienced colors, for instance, it will not know what it is like to see red. So, you know, Laplace assumes that, you know, once you have information about it is sufficient. But let me tell you, unless this is augmented, supplemented with our experiences, right? Again, drawing from the works of personal construct psychology, the personal construct theory by Kelly, 1957, because it talks about experiences, right? And of course, it is those particular experiences that help us to develop hypotheses. And then we go ahead, pick information and test, and if they hold, then our behaviors are modeled according to that. So Laplacian thesis, unfortunately, does not look at that. So if Laplacian demon has never experienced the colors, it will not know what red looks like, what orange looks like, and therefore that's a limitation, as you can see. Now, other scholars have also argued that complete objective information is not enough to determine what we call perspectival truth about the current time. It is not enough, again, to determine one's own identity. So even given complete physical information, Laplace's demon might not know that today is Tuesday. So I think you can have information about the past, but Laplace demon will not tell you today is Tuesday, today is Wednesday, today is Thursday. And again, that is a drawback, as you can see. So complete objective information is not enough to determine perspectival truth about the current time or one's own identity. Now, other gaps have been identified by scholars. For example, some people find gaps for mathematics, morality, and other areas as well. Now, for us to be able to avoid these problems, ladies and gentlemen, we not only need to give Laplace's demon more information than what Laplace says, but we need to consider other things which I've just articulated in the last few minutes. So therefore, for us to be able to accommodate non-determinism, we might give the demon full information about the distribution of fundamental physical entities throughout space and time. Now, for us to handle problems involving the mind and the self, ladies and gentlemen, we might give Laplace's demon information about consciousness or principles governing it, along with information about its own location in space-time. Now, if there are gaps for mathematics or morality, we can give Laplace's demon mathematical and moral principles as well. And then at the end of the day, we pick possibly that construction, and we are able to take a decision whether this is correct or not correct. So it is not clear precisely what information is required from Laplace's thinking, but here the key claim is that there is some limited class of base truth that will allow Laplace's demon to do its work. Therefore, ladies and gentlemen, we might say that a compact class of truth is a set of truth that allows or involves only a limited class of concepts, and that avoids trivializing mechanisms such as coding the entire state of the world or the world into a single number. So for us to be able to understand and demystify the Laplace's truth, then we need a compact class of truth, right? And that compact class of truth, ladies and gentlemen, is a set of truth that involves only a limited class of concepts, and which will avoid trivializing mechanisms such as coding the entire state of the world into a single number. So that is what we are dealing with as Laplacian demon, Laplacian truth, and we need that. So, ladies and gentlemen, I will elaborate on this rough characterization in this lecture. For now, we can say that the class of physical truth will be a compact class, as will the expanded class of truth suggest, as we have already seen. Therefore, ladies and gentlemen, at this material time, allow me to articulate this Laplacian thesis. Now, this Laplacian thesis can be generalized. It's general, right? It's general in the sense that we are talking about many aspects that are probably interwoven to form this the suitability thesis. Now, I want to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, that this suitability thesis has three theses in it. Right, and the first category of thesis is what we call inferential suitability, right? Now, there is, when we come to inferential suitability, these are the things that we assume. We assume that there is a certain class of truth such that for all true propositions, P, a Laplacian intellect who knew all the truth in that class would be in a position to know that proposition P. That's what we call the inferential suitability. There is a compact class of truth. Yes, right. Now that compact class of truth is such that for all propositions, that the one I gave you, that if we have elections tomorrow, the NRM candidate will win. You have elections tomorrow, the FDC will win. Right, those are now the propositions. So if you have a class of truth such that for all true propositions, right, that the NRM candidate wins, a Laplacian intellect, remember you need a vast Laplacian intellect to process and understand that information, right? So that intellect who knew all the truth in that class, right, would be in a position to know that the NRM candidate will win. So that is what we call the inferential suitability. So inferential suitability, ladies and gentlemen, allows a broader class of base truth than Laplacian suitability. But otherwise, it shares a similar form, ladies and gentlemen. So in both theses, the idea is that if the demon knew all the basic truth, it could come to know all the truth, perhaps by inference from the basic truth. Therefore, you can actually use inferences. So many of us here, from time to time, we do some bit of analysis. We analyze data, process data, right, and run inferential statistics. But we probably do not know where that aspect of inferential statistics comes from, and the Laplacian suitability theory has not been given due consideration. Right, but that's what the Laplacian suitability theory says with the inferential suitability, and that's what we are discussing here. So in this case, for the demon to know all the basic truth, ladies and gentlemen, they must be true in the demon's own world. You cannot talk about the truth, right, in somebody's world when that truth is not true in your own world. So for the demon to know all the basic truths, then they must be true. These truths we are talking about, the basic truth, must be true in the demon's own world. So inferential suitability, in effect, requires that the demon inhabits our world or one very much like it, right? And that's why we always extend, by extension, we say if it is true for this section, it is true for the other section as well. And that's why sometimes we generalize findings. You say, I have discovered that there's a relationship between education and probably performance at the workplace. And therefore you say, since this happens in this setting, it will also happen in another setting, ladies and gentlemen. So inferential suitability, ladies and gentlemen, in effect requires that the demon inhabits our world, or at least a world that is similar to the one that we are in. And that demon also knows all the basic truth about it, and also comes to know all truth from there. So this requirement, ladies and gentlemen, gives rise to a second sort of problem for Laplace's demon. Remember, we are critiquing this body of knowledge. In the actual world, we may suppose one truth is that there are no Laplacian demons, right? But if you believe that these demons do exist, right? Yeah, then one truth is that you've got some bit of truth anyway. So in the actual world, we may suppose one truth at least, that there are no Laplacian demons. But no Laplacian demon could know that there are no Laplacian demon. So I hope it is not confusing, right? So you don't have Laplacian demons, right? But no Laplacian demon would know that there are no Laplacian demons. So to avoid this problem, ladies and gentlemen, we could require the demon to know all the truth about its own modified world rather than about the actual world. But now the demon has to know about itself, and a number of paradoxes threaten this kind of thinking, or this analogy, or this construction of the world. So let's go through these paradoxes in a very short time, and then we'll look at what we call the paradoxes of complexity, right? Now, of course, it is a very complicated issue. It's a complex issue to know the whole universe. You'll never have the basic truth about the universe. It's also complex. The demon's mind needs to be as complex as the whole world. For the demon to know what's happening in the entire world and the truth about the entire world, the demon's mind itself must be as complex itself, right? So to know the entire world, even if it is just a one part of the universe. So there are a number of paradoxes, and of course we also have a paradox of prediction. Now, the paradox of the prediction, ladies and gentlemen, simply tells us that the demon will be able to predict its own actions and then try to act contrary to the prediction. And we have just gone through the paradox of complexity. We've gone through the paradox of prediction. Now we discuss the paradox of knowability. That comes from knowledge, the paradox of knowability. Now, this paradox actually states that if there is any truth Q that the demon never comes to know, perhaps because it never entertains Q, then it seems that the demon could never know the true proposition that Q to exist is a truth, and it does not know it. So that is what it is. If there is any truth Q, then the demon never comes to know, perhaps because it never entertains Q, then it seems that the demon could never know the true proposition that Q is a truth that it does not know, ladies and gentlemen. Now, in order to avoid these paradoxes, we can think of the demon as lying outside the world, or it is trying to know. So, and this is very important because the demon, right, can be in that particular world and trying to know what is happening in that world, but we can also look at the demon as lying outside that particular world that it is trying to know, ladies and gentlemen. So in this case, we can think of the demon as contemplating the universe conditionally. Now, if the Laplacian truth obtain, then this is what follows, ladies and gentlemen. So even if our world does not contain a demon, we can still ask what a demon in some other world could come to know about our world, and if it were given the relevant information in conditional form. So in other words, the demon can be part of us, but the demon can be outside, but we simply give that demon relevant information about what is happening here, and then the demon will help us to predict with a certain level of accuracy. So such a demon needs not contemplate its own existence, ladies and gentlemen. So that is what we call conditional scrutability, ladies and gentlemen. Remember, we said that this inferential, actually we did not even start with inferential, we said that Laplace comes up with what we call a scrutability thesis. Now this Laplace's scrutability thesis right, has three other related, right, thesis. And the first one was inferential suitability thesis. Now the second one is what we call the conditional suitability, having the demon, right, outside our environment, but being given that information, and it helps us understand what is happening. So there is a compact class of truth such that for all propositions P, ladies and gentlemen, a Laplacian intellect will be in a position to know that if P, right, if the truth in that class obtained, then that proposition will be correct. And take a very simple example that we used for elections. In the coming elections, let's say the NRM candidate will win. So that's a proposition, right? Now when you talk about conditional suitability, right, we mean that we have a compact class of truth, right, that we give to that demon. And we know that for all true propositions, right, propositions like now, the NRM candidate will win, a Laplacian intellect will be in a position to know that if, right, the truth in that class obtained, then the NRM candidate will win. So we can make one final change to that, ladies and gentlemen. So a key element of Laplacian idea is that the Laplacian truths are all the truths that the demon needs. So the demon only needs the truth and nothing more than that. But remember, a few minutes ago we did discuss what knowledge is, and we said that knowledge is justified true beliefs. And of course I did give you the conditions upon which, and the foundations upon which truth can be established, right? So of course the demon in this case needs information. So here the idea is that to know the condition, right, that I've just given you a few minutes ago, if the basic truth holds, then P holds, right? So you are able to draw inferences in this case. So that's what we call the conditional suitability. So the demon need not rely on a posteriori sources such as perception, introspection, or testimony. But the demon can know the conditional a priori, or with the justification independent of experience, ladies and gentlemen. So we might put this as follows. So we now go to the third suitability that we call a priori suitability. So with a priori suitability, we are saying there is compact class of truth such that for all true propositions P, a Laplacian intellect will be in position to know a priori that if the truth in that class obtain, then that proposition will also obtain. So those three that I've just given you, ladies and gentlemen, are what we call thesis, or what we call suitability thesis. So they say that there is a compact class of basic truth. So all those three, from which all truth can be determined, given sufficient powerful reasoning, and that's why we need that vast intellect. Right, so, but ladies and gentlemen, out of all this, a number of questions come up, and all sorts of questions immediately arise. How can these suitability theses be made precisely? So how can you develop, right? How can these suitability theses be made precise? So the issue of preciseness becomes very important. Why should we believe them, and how can one argue for them? Just which truths are among the basic truths, and how small can the basis be in this case? Ladies and gentlemen, we have seen a generalized Laplacian thesis, which we called the suitability thesis. Now, this suitability thesis has three related aspects, And the first one is inferential scrutability. The second one, if you recall, is what we called the conditional scrutability. And the third one, ladies and gentlemen, is a priori scrutability. Now, these three scrutabilities, thesis, as we have just seen here, assert that there is a compact a class of basic truth. That's an underlying aspect. Now, that basic compact, or that compact of basic truth, right, we do determine truth from it. So there's a compact class of basic truth from which all truth can be determined given sufficient powerful reasoning. And that's why we need a vast intellect where reasoning can take place. Now, in this case, ladies and gentlemen, a number of questions do come up, right, with these, what we call scrutability thesis. The first question is, how can these scrutability theses be made precise? The second question is, why should we believe them, right? And how can one argue for them? Now, the other question is, just which truths are among the basic truths, and how small can the basis be? And then, what about hard cases such as knowledge of social truth, or moral truth, or mathematical truth? What does the scrutability framework tell us about language, thought, knowledge, and reality, ladies and gentlemen? All these questions will be discussed later. Now, I suspect at this material time, right, that the scrutability thesis just discussed will be seen obvious, and that you not have any problem with it. I hope that they at least seem plausible to many of you attending this course or this lecture. But to paraphrase Russell, one of the philosophers, he says that philosophy is the art of moving from obvious premises to interesting conclusions. And that was Russell. Now, even if scrutability theses are obvious, there are many interesting conclusions downstream from them. Of course, these requiring only a compact base do not do everything that Laplace's stronger thesis could do. Now, if a demon is given full specification of basic physical entities, right, and of course, which are distributed throughout space and time, for example, then its ability to predict the future is less impressive than it would have been for Laplace's original demon. I think, nevertheless, ladies and gentlemen, the weaker thesis is powerful because of its many applications. So this scrutability thesis, which has been discussed and dismissed by some scholars and considered to be very weak, has many, many applications. Right? Let me just point out a few applications as I close this lecture. Right? I believe it has applications to epistemology. That is the study of knowledge, right? And of course, the relationship between scrutability thesis and knowledge creation is fairly obvious. For example, the scrutability thesis is at least a cousin of the knowability thesis. So you need knowledge. So the thesis, and that's the thesis that all truth can be known. So that is one of the applications. But it also has application to other areas like metaphysics, right? So, and in metaphysics, specific versions of scrutability thesis can be used to help determine what is true and what is fundamental. And of course, the other area of application is the philosophy of science. And in the philosophy of science, the scrutability thesis can be used to shed light on reductive explanations and the unity of science, ladies and gentlemen. Now, in the philosophy of mind discipline, the scrutability thesis can be used to help understand primitive concepts and the content of thought. And if you recall in the previous lecture, we did look at concepts, right? And of course, concepts are building blocks of knowledge, because these are the ones that actually constitute the construction of reality. And then if we know how we can conceptualize and then bring it to that level of the constructs, and then of course variables and how conceptual systems are developed, then we are doing a very good job there. So that's why we are talking about those aspects of knowing the primitive concepts and the content of thought, and that is in the philosophy of mind. So perhaps, ladies and gentlemen, most importantly, the suitability thesis has powerful applications in the philosophy of language, helping us to analyze notions of meaning and the content that are tied to thought and knowledge. In fact, the suitability framework bears directly on many of the central debates in philosophy. One version of the thesis can be used to defend what you call a Freudian approach to meaning. And the Freudian approach to meaning here refers to an analysis of meaning grounded in rationality and the a priori. And of course, that's what happens. It defends the Freudian as opposed to the purely Russellian approach. And the Russellian approach deals with an analysis grounded in a reference and the external world. So that is quite important for us to understand how that comes up. But anyway, ladies and gentlemen, we may not have time to go through everything as I said, but in closing, we are saying that the suitability framework tends in the direction contrary to a number of trends in the post-1950 philosophy trends, which includes direct reference theories of meaning, externalism about mental content, and rejection of the analytic synthetic distinction in various aspects. So this suitability thesis, the Laplacian suitability thesis, allows us and enables us to understand and to support the ideas from an earlier era of philosophy. And therefore, it supports Gottloeb's Frege distinction between sense and reference, and helps provide a concrete account of what Freudian senses are, ladies and gentlemen. So it coheres well with the Bertrand Russell's idea about constructions of the external world and about the role of acquaintance in thought and knowledge, ladies and gentlemen. And above all, it provides support. So the Laplacian thesis provides support for many key ideas of the great logical empiricist called Rudolf Carnap. And like the other 20th logical empiricist, I know that Carnap is often dismissed as a proponent of a failed research program, but I can tell you, ladies and gentlemen, this is an aspect of the construction of the world, ladies and gentlemen. So I want to thank you for the time that you have taken trying to listen to me. I'm sure you can see the link between the previous lectures we had on knowledge and the nature of understanding, where we looked at the reality, the various concepts as building blocks of understanding, and the conceptual systems relating it to the construction of the world, which is taken from Carnap's construction of the world. And when we talk about the off pole, then we are referring to the logical structure of the world. Ladies and gentlemen, in this lecture, we've seen the Laplacian demon. We have discussed the Laplacian suitability thesis, constituted by inferential, conditional, and a priori suitability. And then we have seen the application of Laplacian demon to epistemology, philosophy, metaphysics, and other disciplines, ladies and gentlemen. So if we meet next time, ladies and gentlemen, I'll take you a step further, because now we've seen what those things are, what Laplacian thesis is. We shall now look at suitability and the logical structure of the world. So stay well, stay safe. I wish you a nice time. Let's meet in our next lecture. Thank you. Bye.